Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. Here in the project Books Are the Basis from the ISKCON Ministry of Education. And we are very happy and honored to have with us today His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for this honor. I've been seeing this series of podcasts with illustrious Vaishnavas that you've been having. I felt delighted to see this emphasis on a more Brahmanical approach to Krishna consciousness, where we go deep into Shastra. And I'm grateful to be of some assistance in this very important initiative.
Thank you so much. We are happy and honored to have you, especially knowing you're very intellectually and intelligent, one of our future brahmanas and scholars, or already scholars now in ISKCON. So many of our viewers will know Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. He's a brahmachari, a mentor, spiritual author. He originally has studied electronics and telecommunic engineering from the Government College of Engineering in Pune. Also served as a software engineer. And then at some point, Prabhu decided to dedicate his life fully to spiritual life, to help devotees or help people in general, seeing so much stress, addiction, misdirection, and the need or the lack of spirituality. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is traveling around the world, before pandemic times, and has preached in universities such as Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, also in different companies such as Intel, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. And also he's well known as an author. He writes articles at the Back to God magazine. Also his articles have been published in many national newspapers in India. And he's also well known for his daily reflections on the Bhagavad-Gita. And in this way, helping many, many people to understand deeper Srila Prabhupada's wisdom. And he's also a member of the Shastric Advisory Council for the GBC and an author of 25 books. When I checked your webpage, it's the Spiritual Scientist, right? Is your webpage?
Yeah, two websites, The Spiritual Scientist and GitaDaily.com.
All right. Yeah. The GitaDaily.com is for the Gita Reflections, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I was quite impressed to see the content. You have so many articles, so many interviews, so many lectures. It's quite amazing. So wonderful to have you with us in this topic on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. Obviously, you are someone who has read and studied Srila Prabhupada's books very deeply. So great to have you. Maybe we can start to find out how you actually came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books. Obviously, you grew up in you had a
yes
cultural background already, but then how you came in touch with Prabhupada's books, that would be great to hear.
That's true. Thank you. So the first book I got was Bhagavad-Gita. It was given to me by my friend, who I thought was who was never really spiritually minded, who was more materialistic, you could say, than me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw that he's a completely changed person. And so I wondered, what happened to you? He said that his reply was, it will happen to you also. And then he gave me a Bhagavad-Gita. My first thought was, hey, I've read the book. In India, growing up, Bhagavad-Gita we had read. But I said, okay, if this book has changed him so much, he's attributing this change to him, to this book, maybe I should read it. Mm-hmm. And I started reading it. It took me some time to understand what was going on. Although I'm from India, the philosophy was slowly making sense. But I remember the book, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, was what struck me. The Bhagavad-Gita is a big book. And of course, we read many times. I started reading it, then I got some taste, then I got PQPA. Until then, I had read many authors. Reading was one of my passions, obviously. And I'd heard many talks also. I was somewhat on a spiritual journey, not on a serious spiritual journey, but I was exploring something more to do in life, apart from just pursuing a career, maybe make a contribution to society. be a part of some kind of movement. I was already an active member of social welfare organization. But when I read Perfect Questions and Perfect Answers, that was the first time it struck me that spirituality could be so rational. It was not just about feeling good or even being good. There's a lot of spirituality that I read was about how you can be more peaceful, how you can feel calmer, which is important. We live in Upadrutaha, age of distress, and especially mental distress. And there were some people whom I saw that because of their spiritual practices, they were doing better things in life. Some of them were doing something for society. So I had an overall positive conception of spirituality, but it was more in terms of whether it makes you do some good actions or it makes you feel better. But that it could give a better understanding of life, that there was a very deep philosophical aspect of spirituality. That was what was struck me from that Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Prabhupada was rational, Prabhupada was cutting, Prabhupada was humorous, Prabhupada was sweet in terms of personally reciprocating with the people, especially in that case, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, Bob Cohen. So that was the first memory of my book. And probably from that time, I started the journey. And somehow that became the taste, the flavor of Krishna consciousness for me. In the sense that, for me, Krishna consciousness is always conceived as like having questions and getting answers. So from Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, I took that approach to every book. When I read a passage also, when I read a purport, I really can't engage myself in the reading unless there's some question in my mind. So sometimes I read a translation and I don't jump to the purport. I read a translation, maybe read it once, twice, thrice, till some question comes in. What I found is that if there is no question, then the answer doesn't have much value. So Prabhupada's purports are answering questions that if we read the verses, if we read the scriptures, we will naturally have. So I feel that approach of trying to seek answers to questions, that has, by Krishna's mercy, helped me a lot in appreciating Prabhupada's, not just books, but Prabhupada's legacy at large. Because in one sense, books do lead to a lot of understanding. At the same time, what struck me, I read 4 or 5 books, and then I remember that I had so many questions. And one time I was traveling with one of my senior devote guides, Radheshyam Prabhu. We were traveling from Pune to Mumbai at that time. And we were in the train together. He says, "Can I ask some questions?" He says, "Yes, sure." And then I had 6 full-scape pages of questions from top to bottom. We said, we'll require a dozen trips to Mumbai and Pune to answer those questions. But then he answered several questions and he told me that, he said that it's good that you're reading books seriously. That's how you're getting so many questions. And I'll be happy to answer your questions, but you read books more, you'll find answers to these questions. So that has been my overall approach. And over the years, I maybe lost my way a little bit, in the sense that we got caught in preaching. And then that approach it was more of searching for preaching material than searching really for answers. So that got me a little lost. Maybe you could say I lost a little focus on Prabhupada's books, not in a big way, but in a small way. And now that's how I also started my Monks podcast, where I have discussion with devotees. And that has actually given me a very big appreciation for Prabhupada's writings even more. So I feel that it is important definitely to read books, but the books are meant to be both internally, they are meant to be stimulator of a particular disposition, inquisitiveness, questions arise, and they are also meant to be the doorway into association. So when we read, when we think, we have questions internally, and then we have discussions externally. And that makes reading much more relishable. If reading is done in a solitary way, of course, reading is in one sense solitary activity. It is an important, that's all. But for us, it's not just an intellectual activity. For us, reading is a devotional activity, is a social activity. It is a spiritual activity. So in that sense, I feel the social dimension is the personal dimension, the social dimension also important. The personal inquisitiveness and the social connection, reciprocation, exchanges. That's briefly my journey.
That's very interesting. I mean, basically, you're describing a very active reading. It's not just reading, but actually, there's always some question, there's some inquiry, there is some interest in understanding, getting answers. And I like how you connected with your monks podcast. I didn't mention at the beginning, of course, many devotees will know you from your own podcast, where the same element of question and answer again comes in. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Maybe we can start with the basic question, just why do you feel it's important to read Srila Prabhupada's books, or what are the benefits of regularly reading in general?
If you had asked this question to me 10 years ago, my answer would have been different. I would say even 4 or 5 years ago, the answer would have been different. Right now, my main answer would be to get a holistic understanding. To get a holistic understanding. Because otherwise, we live in a devotee community where, by Prabhupada's mercy, by Krishna's mercy, philosophy does have a significant level of importance. I have friends in other organizations, and they are more of activist kind of things. Their philosophy is not that important. But in our organization, Prabhupada didn't want philosophy to be important. But the danger I have seen is, if we don't ourselves read Prabhupada's books, then we just hear quotes of Prabhupada from here or there, and then those quotes shape our perception of Prabhupada. And that can lead to a lot of fragmentation. That can lead to excessive judgmentality. Prabhupada said this, you're not doing this. So I find that we all will be connected with Prabhupada because we are in Prabhupada's movement, and we will hear Prabhupada's quotes and other things. But generally, if we just hearing this class here, that class there, hearing this quote on this website and that or there, what we get is a fragmented understanding. Now, I'm not saying that all this is not important, because we all, as I said, we are a part of a living tradition, and we need lectures are important, podcasts are important, classes are, articles are important, many things are important. But if you want a holistic understanding of Prabhupada, not just what they say is like a hunting for quotes to support our own understanding, or an understanding based only on quotes. They're two different things. That I already have some understanding, and I am only looking for quotes to reinforce that understanding. Or that I have got some quotes in my mind, and quotes are important, but those quotes alone have shaped my understanding. So I find that lack of holistic understanding can lead to many extremities. So it can lead to overemphasis on one aspect of bhakti, to the not only the de-emphasis or negligence, but even derision of other aspects of bhakti. So somebody may be a book distributor, and it's wonderful to distribute books now. It's a book distribution marathon. But they may neglect everything else. Somebody who's studying Shastra, somebody who's teaching Shastra, they say, actually you should just be distributing books. Or somebody may be actually cultivating devotees, and they may find quotes which support Prabhupada, supportive quotes from Prabhupada. So I find that quotes are important, but studying Prabhupada's books regularly will give us a holistic understanding. And that understanding, it's very difficult to get if we are not reading Prabhupada ourselves. So that would be my answer right now. Maybe if you had asked 5 years ago, I would have said it is higher taste, it is intellectual conviction, so there are many other factors. But right now I would say first-hand reading of Prabhupada's books, and not just one passage here, one passage there, but systematic reading is what we will understand the person, the great person Srila Prabhupada was. Otherwise, we reduce Prabhupada to certain sound bites. And unfortunately, what happens is that sometimes some of the most sensational, some of the most provocative, some of the most controversial sound bites, they get the most space in today's social media. They get the most visibility. And those can actually give us a distorted understanding of Krishna consciousness. So I feel holistic understanding is very important. And that's what we get by reading Prabhupada's books regularly.
instead of depending what others say or what other argumentation are there, but actually that for oneself, if we study ourselves, we can get a holistic understanding of Prabhupada and get a balance.
Yeah, I'm not saying the two are exclusive. We also need to understand from others, no doubt. But it's a systematic reading. The systematic reading can be guided by someone else also. So one of the things which I find is, since you made this point, that many devotees, they also feel that, I should be reading Prabhupada's books, and that Prabhupada has worked so hard to write the books. But then what happens? We read and somehow we may find that it is repetitious, or I don't find anything stimulating, I don't understand much. So then often the reading becomes guilt-driven rather than service-driven. Because I have to do it, so I'll do it. And I don't think guilt-driven reading is actually very helpful. Krishna also says that dadami buddhi yogam tam, that intelligence to make good choices, the intelligence to come to me, that comes when, this is 10.10 Bhagavad-Gita, bhajatam priti purvakam, when the devotion, when the bhakti is done with priti. So it is helpful that if we have found a like-minded Vaishnava, then if we are reading one section of the Bhagavatam and we want to go deep into it, then maybe we can hear classes by one devotee on that particular book or that particular section systematically. And then see, how the purport opens up, how the scripture opens up. So my stress is not that we replace hearing with reading, but rather we be systematic. I'll take one pastime, maybe take the Uttarasur pastime. 3-4 chapters are there. Actually, it's a long pastime because Chitraketu also comes in over there. But if I take this pastime, let me read it. Let me hear not just one Bhagavatam class. Maybe has anybody a series of talks on this? Let me hear those. And then that combination of reading and hearing, especially if it is not just like an inspirational talk, but it's a systematic study. Then what happens? Then we also start seeing, how, while reading, how our own thoughts can be stimulated. From this point, I could connect with this point. I didn't think about this connection. So that is helpful, no doubt. In fact, I also, I think I also have one of the first people to have online Bhakti Shastri course in our movement available for devotees. So it's a Bhakti courses. So what I did is that for Ishopanishad and Nectar of Instruction, I made PowerPoints and I divided the purports into paragraphs. And each paragraph, I gave a theme. And then I explained in the paragraph. So the Ishopanishad classes purports are long, the classes may also be long. So it's almost 163 classes for the Bhakti Shastri. It's much longer than normal Bhakti Shastri. But what I did was, at least I tried to offer my service over there, that how we can appreciate each purport, not just as a purport, but each purport has parts. Each paragraph has a theme. And then read that, understand that. So that way, we can go deeper in our reading by having aids for the reading specifically. Then that I find is most nourishing. Because for most people, if you look at the history before 200, 300 years ago, maybe 500 years ago, you can say, books were very rare. Books were very rare before the printing press came about. And so mostly wisdom was passed, whether it is in India or whether it is in Europe or wherever else. It was passed down through the oral tradition. So people have never been, in the past, extensive readers. The books were primarily written by Brahmanas for Brahmanas. And even now, most people read books, they'll prefer light reading. They will read news, novels, some kind of fiction. So serious reading, I don't say people don't do it. It's not something which everybody can very easily do. Serious reading is largely a Brahmanical activity. Now, of course, Prabhupada wanted all of us to become Brahmanas, but not all of us may have a Brahmanical varna. That inclination might not be, that might not be our primary inclination. So then we may need some aids in reading. That's why, rather than making devotees feel guilty, why don't you read? Why don't you read? You should read. Rather provide some aids. This is how while reading we can think. From this purport, these points, these are the connections over here. So that way, I feel if we have courses based on Prabhupada's books, not just a general understanding of the book, but going into the purports, then that can help Prabhupada says one of the aspects of Krishna consciousness is we learn how to think. Not just what to think, but how to think. So when I read this purport, how do I think about it? So unless the purport gets us thinking, the reading will become mechanical, it will become routine. And then it will become uninspiring or boring. It will become like another chore to do, another burden, another chore to do. Okay?
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful point for those who maybe not feel so inclined to deeply study, that we help in ways to make Prabhupada's knowledge more accessible, more easily digestible maybe for them. Mm-hmm. We speak often in this series of interviews, we often speak about how Srila Prabhupada is present in his books, and also how to better understand Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission. And in preparation to this interview, we all in exchange, you mentioned how reading is also like a personal reciprocation with Srila Prabhupada. Would you like to share a little bit about that with us?
Yes. No, I could say that my relationship with Prabhupada's books changed dramatically after I started writing. Not just writing a few articles here and there, but writing books. Because it's a book. Many authors, even you could say secular authors, use this metaphor that a book is like a baby. And the whole process of writing is like the labor pain for that mother to go through. And finally there is the delivery. So there is, even for ordinary authors, there is a significant amount of investment of one's own person in the book. So this is at one level a universal truth, that authors invest themselves in their books. And that's universal. Now when we consider Srila Prabhupada is not just an ordinary author, he's a Mahabhagavat. He's not just writing on an ordinary subject. He's writing about a subject that is dearest to his heart. And he's writing about a subject that we want should become the dearest to our heart. So in that sense, the intellectual investment, the emotional investment, the personal investment of Srila Prabhupada in his books is far, far more than what would be there in any other author. So I would say that I'll talk about this at three levels. One is that those who are regular authors or good authors, every author develops their own voice. That, if you read a particular author regularly, you can say, hey, this particular writing doesn't seem to be written by this author. We can hear the voice of a person. This is even in ordinary circles, this is true. So that is even more true for Srila Prabhupada. And we have that big advantage because we also have Prabhupada's Vani with us, in the sense that we have Prabhupada's voice, Prabhupada's lectures are there. So I feel that if we have heard Prabhupada's lectures regularly and then we read Prabhupada's books, at the very least, we can feel Prabhupada's Vani over there, that Prabhupada is speaking over here. So every author has their voice, and we can especially hear Prabhupada's voice because we also heard his voice literally through his classes. So that's one aspect of the voice of Srila Prabhupada, which is very distinctive. If you read Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur or Bhaktivinoda Thakur, or even our particular Guru Vrinda, Guru Varga, they all have their voices, but Prabhupada's voice is very distinct. So that's one thing. Now, initially I used to think that Prabhupada's voice is much more evident in his lectures than in his books. That was my initial feeling when I read. So I said, all this is after I started writing myself, then I started noticing it. So, and I'm not being self-presumptuous. I'm not comparing that my books are in any way like Prabhupada's books, but it's a different perspective. It's just like we hear some speaker and we get some experience. We may hear a very expert speaker and then we hear, that's such a great speaker. But when we ourselves become speakers, then our appreciation of the expertise of that speaker goes to another degree. So this was my notice, that I felt initially that Prabhupada's voice was much clearer. At least I could hear it much more clearly in his lectures than his books. Then I started noticing one thing, that actually there are verses and there are word-to-word translation, there are translation, there are purports. And then that's why in his books, we're not just getting Prabhupada's voice. We're getting Shukadeva Goswami's voice. We're getting Sutta Goswami's voice. We're getting Krishnadas Viraj Goswami's voice. Now, we say that is also there, of course, in his lectures. In his lectures, Prabhupada may quote a lot of verses, but he's not giving word-to-word translations. He's usually not giving literal translations. So in his purports, Prabhupada is not only giving himself, he's actually giving us the tradition. So it's a much greater impact. So that's how I started. Okay, there are two voices over here. There is the speaker's voice, and then there's a commentator's voice over here. So then I started appreciating it much more. So that was one aspect of the presence of the voice. The second aspect, what I found is this, again, I would say I've discovered recently, and maybe this addresses a later question about practices that might help us in reading. I find that I have started discovering the joys of slow reading. In the past, the idea was, okay, it's like a marathon. Maybe not even a marathon, it's like a sprint. I have to complete this book in this much time, and I have this much time. And that's important. We want to read Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada has given such a legacy. We want to read all of them. But now, I found that I have over the years found certain passages which are my favorite. And whenever I feel a need for shelter, I feel a need for guidance, I go back to those passages and read them aloud. And that is a dramatically different experience. Now, after I started personally reading the purports aloud, I found that when Prabhupada has created the system by which we have his purports read aloud in the classes. Earlier, I used to feel, oh, this is just, anybody can read the purport. Why do you have to read it aloud? Just start the class. I would like to hear the class. I wasn't able to appreciate the reading aloud aspect because sometimes the purports are long, and then sometimes reading the purport takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I used to get a little impatient. But actually, reading aloud and not just having somebody else read it aloud, you read it aloud. Of course, somebody else reading aloud also is good. But we read it aloud, it's a very different experience. Actually, then you can sense Prabhupada's presence much more. This also I learned from writing. One of the guidelines for writers said that you read out your work aloud. Then you will see where the flow is stumbling, where the words are not sounding properly. So it could be, you could say it's a skill in writing, but you can apply it to reading. And it's very powerful. So I feel that reading aloud, if we are not feeling Prabhupada's presence in his books, we're not feeling that connection with Prabhupada, then just read something aloud. Now, of course, there is so much of Prabhupada's legacy that we may not be able to read everything aloud. But say if we have a plan to read 1 hour a day or whatever time we are reading every day, maybe mark out some time to read aloud. Maybe read the whole thing, whatever we are going to read. 20 minutes we read if you're going to have 30 minutes to read. And then whichever passage struck you within the 20 minutes, go back and read aloud for 5 minutes. Read aloud for 10 minutes. Maybe read it once or twice or thrice. I find that it's a dramatically deeper experience. So reading things aloud, slowly reflecting. So that gives the presence of Prabhupada much, much more. So I'm trying to talk about this more in you could say, a practical rather than a mystical sense. How is Prabhupada present in his books? Yeah. And the third aspect I find is, with respect to Prabhupada's presence in his books, is if we look, this brings me to the third part, is one of the most, we could say, underutilized instructions of Srila Prabhupada. I won't use the word underfollowed, it is underutilized. Because following is the idea of, we have to submit, we have to obey. I say this is something which is empowering as available for us. But not many, even I haven't used it so much. I recently started it much more. So this is that you earlier talked about active reading. So I would like to share a quote of Srila Prabhupada over here. Mm-hmm. So I conduct courses on journaling for better study of scripture. So this is one quote in that. So Prabhupada says, realization means you should write. Every one of you, what is your realization? What for this back to God it is? You write your realization. What you have realized about Krishna, that is required. It is not passive. Always you should be active. whenever you find time, you write. Never mind 2 lines, 4 lines, but you write your realization. You write your realization. So Prabhupada goes further and then he says that, same quote he says, Shravanam Kirtanam, writing or offering prayers, glories. This is one of the functions of the Vaishnava. You are hearing, but you have to write also. Then write means smaranam, remembering what you have heard from your spiritual master, from the scripture. So now what happens by this writing is that 2-3 things. One way I tried, and now again, it's very easy to tell others to do things which we ourselves may not always be doing. But it's good to remind ourselves that when I say read something aloud, something strikes me. And then what Prabhupada is saying is write this down. Write it down. Now, the writing I have found is 3 levels. Just write whatever quote of Prabhupada struck you, just write it down. Write it, maybe nowadays we can write in our phone, write in a pocket diary or whatever. Just writing those words ourselves deepens our connection. Another thing which we could do is write that thought in our own words. Okay, what is Prabhupada trying to say in our own words? And then another could be we reflect on that thought ourselves. Okay, why is, among all the thoughts over here, why did this particular point strike me so much? What thoughts is it stimulating in my head? So when that happens, it becomes so enlivening. So journaling is basically, Prabhupada says, your realization, write it down. Now, what is realization in this context means? Something struck me. And that's why I want to know, why did it strike me? What is it that is so inspiring or illuminating or sometimes shocking? Because Prabhupada makes some, you could say, disturbing points also at times. Disturbing means they disturb our preconceptions. So what happens is that if you take one point from the purport which struck us, journal about it, and then after that, when we are going to the temple, we offer our obeisances to Prabhupada, we offer Guru Puja, at that time meditate on the point. I try to envision, Prabhupada in the early morning hours with the dictaphone, Prabhupada's deity is there, and Prabhupada is speaking. That Prabhupada is speaking that particular point. So now this is you could say using our imagination in Krishna's service. But it is, once we can get a taste for doing this, you'll find that then Prabhupada's presence will become much more appreciated. Because we may say that we should rely more on Shabda, not on Pratyaksha, on our ears, not our eyes. That is true, but biologically we can say we are designed in such a way that we do give a lot of reliance on our eyes. And that is not wrong. That's why we have the whole culture of deity worship. We see Krishna with our eyes. So if we can connect the Prabhupada whose books we are reading with the Prabhupada whom we are offering our obeisances to and worshipping, then the personal aspect of Srila Prabhupada becomes much clearer. And one way we link it is, okay, something in the book struck me. Then can I connect that? Can I visualize that Prabhupada is speaking this to me? Or if visualizing is a little difficult, what I try to do is sometimes convert some instruction of Srila Prabhupada, some point that Srila Prabhupada has given, into a prayer that I offer to Prabhupada. Prabhupada, this is such an important point. Please help me remember it. Please bless me so that I can apply it in my life. Please bless me so that I can understand this better. So then the connection becomes much deeper. So 3 things I said: Prabhupada's voice, when we read the author's voice, then reading Prabhupada's books aloud, and then writing our thoughts, and then praying those thoughts, praying for understanding those thoughts, or visualizing those thoughts are being spoken by Prabhupada in his Vigraha. These are ways in which we can feel Prabhupada's presence much more in his books.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's very, very rich what you share with us. I think very practical also. If you don't mind, maybe you like to share with us a bit more the process, how you write, in the sense, now we have this Shastra Chakshu, this understanding that when we read Srila Prabhupada's books, we start to see the world through the eyes of Shastra. And personally, there was a phase in my life where I also was writing. I had a little block, hopefully to start again. after hearing you. Certainly, I'm inspired to again take up writing. But what my personal experience was that, when I have to write something, when I go through my day, then always I kind of see things and try to relate them with some philosophical point that I read, and how can I connect what I read and what I see in life. So this contemplation, trying to see the world through the eyes of Shastra, I'm sure that's also a very important aspect of writing, especially in your case, you're writing about Bhagavad-Gita Reflections. Would you like to share something about that?
Yes, definitely. So actually, I have been writing on the Gita every day for, I started this in 2011. So this is 2021. For 10 years, I've been writing now every day. So I have more than 4,000 articles on GitaDaily.com.
Wow.
And you could say this particular quote was one of the biggest inspirations for me. Prabhupada says, write every day. Every day, write something. Don't be passive. So what I have found is that when we try to put something in our words, when we are writing, what are we doing is, see, actually our words have a very deep and personal connection with us. Nowadays, normally in crime, it's to detect a person, the fingerprint is used. And that's important. But nowadays, researchers are finding that even people have their own voices. Although some people can mimic different voices, but it's like if a person, you wake them up from sleeping and you throw water on their face, and they will scream in their natural voice. So each of us has our individual voice. And this is not just, you could say, the product of our throat. It's actually a manifestation of who we are. So when we try to put what wisdom Srila Prabhupada has given us through his books and through the tradition that he has introduced us to in our words, then in one sense, we are investing ourselves in the message much, much more. So it is, okay, I hear it, that message goes to some extent inside me. I speak it, the message will go inside me and come out in a much deeper way. But if I write it, it comes out so much deeper. It goes in much deeper, and what comes out is also much deeper. So Srila Prabhupada did want all of us to write. And of course, Prabhupada gave many instructions. I don't want this to become like another guilt-driven thing. Oh, Prabhupada told us we didn't do it. But just even if with respect to writing, so in this, I have a 3-session course on journaling for better scriptural study. So what I recommend, broadly speaking, is first is just write something that struck you. Mm-hmm. Then try to write, why did it strike you? This is where we bring in a little bit more personal element. Something that struck me in this, why did it strike me? And then, in broadly speaking, actually, absorption is a function of connection. When do we become absorbed in something? When what we are reading or what we are hearing, we are immediately able to connect this with this, this with this, this with this. Oh, I'm reading this particular pastime, and then it's reminding me of that point and that pastime and that detail. The more we can connect, the more we become absorbed. So one way to stimulate our thoughts is, okay, have I heard something similar before? Have I heard something different before? So in what context did I hear? And how can I relate with this? So one of the points which I found very helpful with respect to writing is that the mind sometimes turns off when we are reading. And says, hey, they're the same points. We have read it before. So instead, turn that question around when the mind says, it's the same point. Okay, when was the last time I read this point? When was the last time I heard this point? In what context was that point there? And then when you see that, it becomes, I would say that, like if I'm reading, I have a flashlight and I'm looking at something. And then, hey, I've seen this. I just want to move a flashlight next. But what happens is, when did I see something similar? When did I read something similar? If I have that question, that's almost like I get another flashlight and I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that. Oh, what are the similarities? What are the differences? It becomes much more enlivening, the whole process of reading. So I said these 2-3 questions. What struck me the most? Why did it strike me so much? And have I read something similar or different? If yes, when? And these three questions themselves are enough for us to start writing. So even if we have 1 hour for it, even if we spend 5 minutes for writing, we will carry it much more with us, whatever we have read. So I feel this is a very empowering practice, and it develops a deeper understanding, not only a deeper understanding, also but a deeper appreciation, deeper connection. And one point I would like to make in this connection is that many devotees I've heard say that I was in distress, and when I open Prabhupada's books, I just find the points I need. I just get the answers that I want. Now, I'd heard so many devotees say it, but somehow I had experienced this in the first decade of my Krishna consciousness. But in the second decade, I was not experiencing it so much. So I was wondering, am I doing something wrong? Am I regressing in my spiritual life? What is happening? But when I started doing these things, reading aloud, praying, journaling, then I found that Prabhupada has put so many jewels in his books. But it's like, how should we put it that? See, a jewel amid ordinary stones is striking. But when a jewel is among so many jewels, it doesn't strike. So when a jewel among so many jewels doesn't strike, that's why when we write, it's like when we write something, when we invest ourselves in it, then we say, hey, this is a jewel and this is so special. It's so special. So that's how I found that guidance, that connection, that insight coming more and more when I start writing. So that would be one aspect I would like to share with you.
I find it very interesting because I'm sure all of us have made this experience. When you read something, all of a sudden we find like, wow, this is an amazing statement. But then to ask ourselves, why do I find this so amazing? That's very interesting to go a little deeper, to reflect. Why do I feel this amongst other statements is so interesting? So to go deeper in that, write about it. I think you already mentioned about...
Yeah, just one point I would like to make, if you don't mind, sorry. That sometimes devotees feel that this will slow down my reading. And if I am reflecting myself, then isn't it my own contaminated mind and senses that are getting involved? Instead of I receiving the pure message of Srila Prabhupada. Shouldn't I just be reading, not get myself involved? One devotee was saying that for me, the perfect reading is just get out of the way and let Prabhupada come into your heart, come into your head. And yes, so all that I said, I would say that these are all suggestions. We are all individuals and we have to find each of us what works best for us. So for some devotees, all this might seem a little too analytical. I just read Prabhupada's books. One devotee friend told me this. When I read Prabhupada's books, it is like I feel as if he was born and brought up in a nice cultured Indian family. He feels that as if I'm in my childhood and Prabhupada is my grandfather and my grandfather is speaking to me. So I just feel so happy being in Prabhupada's presence. That's wonderful. If somebody can feel that presence with Prabhupada, then maybe these tools could be just a distraction. So each of us, I would say this is an individual aspect which is very important. Each of us has to find out how we can connect with Prabhupada personally.
Yeah.
So for some of us, it could be just open your head, open your heart, and just let Prabhupada flow in. But for some of us, we need to get involved more. And I wouldn't say that it is like our contaminated mind and senses are getting involved, so the process is getting contaminated. No. It is our mind and senses are anyway contaminated only. But the more they get involved, the more they will be purified. Yeah. If they're not involved, the message is coming in, but it's not really going deep inside us. So we have to find out how best each of us can involve ourselves. So it's something like classes. Some devotees just like the speaker to speak and just a long class. I'm happy to hear the katha. For some devotees, it's after the class, when the question answers, that's when they are the most alert. And they look forward to the question answers. And they have questions, they want others to ask questions, they look forward for the answers. So each of us is an individual. So we need to find out our individual way to appreciate Shastra and appreciate the gifts that Prabhupada has given us.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to that point of the individuality. Just before we go there, maybe because you mentioned also in the process about prayers. And I found this interesting in the aspect of application. Because yes, we want to understand Prabhupada properly, we want to absorb the knowledge, but then we want to apply in our daily life. Would you say that this whole process of writing and reflecting is also meant to help us to apply that knowledge in our daily life? Or would you suggest other steps that we need to take in order to apply?
Yes, that's true. See, what you said is part of applying. There are two things over here. We could say that at one level, application means just immersion more in the process of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam. So what Prabhupada is saying here is, when you are writing, what are you doing? You are doing Kirtanam, you are doing Smaranam. The quote which I read out to you, you are hearing, but you should also speak. So Kirtanam doesn't just mean Hare Krishna Kirtans, the Mahamantra. Kirtan also means speaking. And we don't need an audience to speak. As an audience is wonderful, but we can speak for our own purification. So when we are journaling, then we are speaking. So that is also Kirtanam. And then if we convert them into prayers, then that is also Smaranam, that is also Vandanam. So rather than seeing reading of Srila Prabhupada's books as just one limb of bhakti, Shravanam, we can see that as a stimulus for multiple limbs of bhakti. So it could be a stimulus for Kirtanam. And that is also very important. I earlier said that I started reading Prabhupada's books primarily for looking for some preaching material. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yena kena prakarena mana Krishna niveshet. Somehow or other read Prabhupada's books. And for most devotees, it's only when they have to give a class, they'll read much more seriously. And I'm not putting myself out of that category. I'm also very much, actually, I'm not even a devotee, struggling to be a devotee. But the point is, if we just have to read a purport, okay, we may read it, but you have to give a class tomorrow morning on the purport. The way we'll read the purport is much, much more serious. So that's why if we see that reading as a segue, as a stimulus for engagement in various limbs of bhakti. So it could be Kirtanam, it could be Smaranam, it could be Vandanam, and it could also be Pada Sevanam. And okay, Prabhupada is talking about service attitude, Prabhupada is talking about humility, Prabhupada is talking about taking up responsibility for Krishna's mission. So those are also applications. So I would say that all those, if we see it as an entry into the world of devotion, into the ninefold limbs of devotion, not just an entry, it's a part of it also, but it's also a further push into the deeper into that world. Then reading becomes much, much more inspiring, energizing, relishable, all of it.
So that's a much more holistic approach to reading and actually seeing it as connected to so many other limbs of bhakti. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, maybe so.
With respect to Kirtanam, one more point I noticed is that in today's world, with social media having democratized outreach, you can say many devotees, if you can just have 2-3 devotees form a group together, and if you're reading, just share one point, what struck you. And then just form a plan with another devotee, you also share one point. And if you find it difficult to write, you could just send audio messages also. So what happens is, even if I read for 15 minutes and I send a 1-minute audio message, and another devotee sends an audio message, it actually also leads to bodhayantaha parasparam. Oh, this is what struck me. This is what struck me. And now this is not always possible. If 2 devotees are reading the same book and they read the same purport, then it's even more relation. It may not always be possible, but this is a way in which I find that, see, when we are practicing bhakti, we get involved in many different projects, different services, and we want to have good relationship with all devotees. But there are some devotees with whom we naturally gel. That's sajatiya. They are like-minded devotees, we can say. But sometimes what happens is, we may not have those like-minded devotees in the project we are in the service we are in. Because ours is a very broad movement. So how do we get that association? We may say, I'll travel to that place and meet them and talk with them. It doesn't work. Our lives are so busy. So I find that one way, we may not be able to sit together and read. But if we have a Sajatiya devotee friend, just tell, every day just share maybe half a minute, 1 minute soundbite of what you read and what you liked in it. And then they share it back. And it can actually deepen our relationship with devotees also that way. There's one devotee group I know here in Mumbai. So I have given a brief verse-by-verse talks on the Bhagavad-Gita, like 10-minute talk on each verse of the Bhagavad-Gita. So for many years, they wanted to read Prabhupada's books and they found it very difficult, couldn't do it. So then they started they have a group of about 15 devotees. So every day they read one verse, they read a purport, and one devotee among those 15 devotees every day is assigned. You raise questions based on this. And then they raise questions and others answer the questions. And then they said that our understanding of the Bhagavad Gita has become so much deeper. And as a stimulus, they may also, like I said, they may also hear the 10-minute soundbite of the talk on that particular verse, specifically on that verse. So that adds to their understanding. So reading can also, as I said, it is not becoming an isolating activity. It can become a bonding activity.
That's a beautiful suggestion. Stay in touch with devotees and sharing these nectar drops.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe towards the end now we could talk a little bit about how to overcome obstacles in reading. Maybe you'd like to share some study habits that could be helpful for devotees in general.
Okay. Yeah. Obstacles. Well, I said, first of all, is the biggest obstacle is the thing that we have to conform. The thought that I have to conform. This is the way I should be reading Prabhupada's books. Somebody might be reading 2 hours every day or 3 hours every day and say, oh, I want to become like that. Well, maybe your life is not oriented to be like that. Maybe it will become in the future, but if it is not, there's no need to feel guilty. We can aspire, I want to read more. But then there are so many aspirations in bhakti. And rather than feeling guilty that I don't have this aspiration, try to have at least some aspiration. Okay, if I have a desire to do more deity worship, if I have a desire to do more chanting, that's also wonderful. Whatever it is we have, we need some desire in devotional service. And that is more important than feeling guilty about not doing any particular activity. So I think that the guilt because of having a preconceived notion of how we should be reading Prabhupada's books or how much we should be reading Prabhupada's books, that is an obstacle. Even if it makes us read, it won't really give us a deeper connection. That's one obstacle. And then, of course, we are all busy, so lack of time could be said to be an obstacle. But my understanding is not so much lack of time as a inability to see relevance and importance. It is, when something is important, we will make time. And we may again send devotees on a guilt trip. You don't understand the importance of Prabhupada's books. Well, don't send me on a guilt trip. Help me to understand. How is it important for me? And that's what, if some of the earlier things which we discussed, bodhan, like sharing with others or reading aloud or writing down some things, those can actually get us more involved. So one thing which I have tried, again, what I would say is, even for me, I have tried many different things. And we all go through different phases in our spiritual life. And it's not necessary that the same thing will work at different times. So at one time in my life, I was extremely busy. Of course, the mind will always say we're always busy. But I was busy. So what I did was that I used to, every morning when I would wake up, first thing I would do is just go to one purport and read it aloud. Even if I'm lying in my bed, even if I'm not even taken off my blanket or something like that, just pick up the phone and read. The phone makes it easy. Normally you say don't keep your phone next to you. And that's also helpful if you're going to go on social media and start surfing. But just the activity of, and especially reading a purport aloud. And if it's a wrong purport, don't even read it full. I find that even 5 minutes of reading aloud, it actually removes tamoguna a lot. And this is the advantage of the Bhagavat Marga. We cannot worship the deity in our bed without bathing, without cleaning ourselves. But the Bhagavat Marga is we can do anywhere. Now, many of us hear classes, and that is wonderful. And many of us may hear audiobooks also, which is also a very powerful resource. But ourselves reading things aloud, that engages us so much. I find that one of the most powerful ways to get rid of the tamas in the morning. To break free from the tamas and really become enlivened. So if we can't do anything else, if we really don't have time, just make this 5 minutes in the morning You don't even have to complete one purport. Just read something aloud for 5 minutes. And that itself will help us. We'll see the potency. We'll see the potency, how it is giving me direction, giving me clarity, giving me energy. And that may inspire us to read more also. So I would say even a small amount of reading on a regular basis, even if we can't do much more than that, that is itself energizing. And then as we start realizing the importance and relevance, whenever we find time, we will use it. So we will start using the time more and more. That's why to have, say, 1 hour unit of time, it's good. Many devotees tell me that in 5 minutes I can't read because I cannot connect with what is going on. I need some substantial amount of time to actually get into Shastra. And that is true. It is good to have that substantial amount of time. But when we don't have that time, then at that time, if we have just a few minutes, then to get into it, one way is to read it aloud. Read it aloud. That's very helpful. So that's just one thought of how to overcome extra obstacle of not being able to see relevance and importance is to read aloud, and then we can feel the tamas clearing within us. The mode of ignorance, the confusion, the disorientation going down, that itself will help us see the relevance and we'll be able to read much more.
And then maybe naturally develop a taste to actually wanting to read more for some time.
Yes, naturally.
Yeah, you stressed the importance of individuality, which is required in study, that everyone needs to maybe find out his own way to absorb best, right?
Yes. I feel the individual aspect, the advantage of that is it also becomes a way in it becomes individualized. It becomes our personal offering to Krishna.
Personal offering to Krishna.
Because we are investing our individuality in the process. We are investing our particular aspect of bhakti, our aspect of devotion in the process. That's what makes it very personal and special. So for those of you who would like to, I have this pre-recorded course also. I do this live intermittently, the journaling for better study of scriptures. But it is also a pre-recorded course which is available. I'm currently based in the Govardhan Eco Village. So on their website, this course is available. Maybe if you like, you could share that information in the YouTube description or something like that, or as a screen share.
Yeah, certainly we'd like to do that. It's on.
This is the journaling for better study of scriptures. So 4 ways writing helps in reading: increasing our absorption and articulation, and increasing our assimilation and application. This is what we broadly discuss in this course.
Okay, that's great. And that's
better study of wisdom texts.
That can be done online on.
Yeah, anybody can join that course.
Yeah,
it's a pre-recorded thing, so you can just download the audio videos and you can hear them.
I will join the course.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us. I don't know, do you have any final message, any last word you'd like to share with us in regard to what we spoke now?
Prabhupada, in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, in the purport to 76 and 77 verses, where Arjuna is saying, Rishyami cha muhurmu. So I'm thrilled at every moment. And Prabhupada writes over there, this is Krishna consciousness, to be thrilled at every moment. And you may say, oh, my life is filled with so many anxieties and so many burdens, and sometimes services also seem to increase the burdens. But actually, reading Shastra, reading Prabhupada's books and connecting with them deeply can actually bring that thrill. That it's not just an intellectual adventure, it's not just a literary adventure, it is actually a devotional adventure. So it's not that every moment when we are reading Prabhupada's books may be a thrill, but it's like on a treasure hunt, suddenly you find a treasure. It's so relishable. So that enjoying life with a thrill, I feel one of the key gateways to that is reading Shastra regularly.
On a treasure hunt, I like that.
So thank you very much, Prabhu, for giving me this opportunity. You brought out a lot of thoughts which I hadn't really recently thought about.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It was a very fascinating conversation. Not only you gave a lot of very brilliant answers and insight and explanation, but I think we could all feel also your personal enthusiasm for this topic. And that was very, very inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.